Number 46. We are up to Psalms 46 and verse 8. And we've been talking about strength in trying times, how the believer should function in trying times. What does our response look like? And for me, it's been eye-opening, it's been enlightening, it's been refreshing, it's been instructional, it's been directional, and more than anything, it's just been a great reminder of how we, God's children, believers, are supposed to behave and show our belief as relates to trying times. And as I've been saying for weeks or months now, certainly we are experiencing trying times in the world, not just with the pandemic alone, but with wars and with outbreaks of violence, obvious lawlessness, many things that are contributing to us living in times that just are, for lack of better anything, trying for us. So I'm going to ask, if you would, before we quote our statement for tonight, help Brother Sonny out there, please. All right. Thank you so much, media. I love y'all. Y'all make me look good. Sometimes y'all can mess me up, but tonight y'all are looking good. As is our custom, as it relates to this study, Bible study, I want us to express our desire to embrace this principle as it relates to strength in trying times. Let's quote our purpose for study tonight. You're familiar with it. Let's go. Our purpose for studying the Bible frequently is to lead us loving God more fervently, which leads us to thinking, speaking, acting, and responding more biblically. That is our purpose. It's not just for information, but it's always for transformation. So, looking at Psalms 46, again, just for context, I'll read verses 1 through 7, and we'll begin the explanation of verse 8. It says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear though the earth should change, and though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains quake at the swelling pride. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy dwelling place of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, and he will not be moved, or rather she will not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations made an uproar, and the kingdoms tottered. He raised his voice, and the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The Lord of Jacob is our stronghold. And the verse that we'll be exploring tonight says, Come, behold the works of the Lord, who has wrought desolations in the earth. As my opening thought says, one key to remaining strong in trying times is looking back and re-examining or remembering what God has already done in past times. Did you get that? One thing that will help us get through times of trouble is to look back and see what God brought us through before. And when we get to looking especially at this time as far as the things happening in this country in particular states with floods and storms and fires and all of the things that are happening, the thing that should encourage us and strengthen us is to look back and be reminded what God has brought us through, and that should help us have strength for what we are going through. And if anybody's in here above the age of, I guess I'll be safe to say 20 or 18, you've been through something. And if God have gotten you through something as a believer, you have something to look back on to remind yourself of what he's brought you through. And that should strengthen you or give you strength for trying times. The very fact that God has brought you through something already. Is there anybody in here tonight or out there that God hadn't brought you through something that you didn't think you were going to get through? Well, if he's brought you through something that you've gotten through, then you should re-examine that something, recall that something, remind yourself of that something, and trust that God will what? Get you through whatever your present trouble is, as verse 1 says. Because that's the kind of God we serve. He is a very present help in trouble. You know, God gets us out of trouble more than one time. And so that's what I want us to look at tonight in this verse 8. Remind ourselves that God has already done something in the past. He's delivered us from something in the past. And whatever that something is, whether it's something old or something new, he certainly is capable of delivering us from our present trouble. My opening statement says, for strength in trying times, we must consider what he has done to advance us to this present hour. Again, just another way of saying how he moved us through the trouble. It's another way of saying Psalms 23, I shall not fear, for thou art with me. God has already advanced us to this very present hour. When we consider what he's done to get us here, this will cause our hearts to what? Worship God. And this truth will strengthen our confidence in the midst of difficult times, knowing that he, God, will continue to work, what? Into the future. Reminding ourselves of what he's done in the past. And that should give us strength and confidence in the midst of whatever troubles that we are going through in the present. Now, one of the ways that, again, immediately lends itself to self-correcting is in the worship of God. It's in the worship of God. When we worship God, and this is kind of where I guess my position on worship and all of the trendiness and all of the styles and all of the self-centered adulation that is being described as worship, this is kind of where, for me, I guess I part ways with much of the stuff that is labeled for worship. Because you've got to remember, worship is supposed to please God. Worship is designed to please God. Worship is about God. Worship is directed towards God. When we look at many of the things that are disguising itself as worship today, y'all, if truth be told, you know that was designed to please people who sit in the sanctuary. I'm not going to name or label things because this is where I get in trouble with some of my colleagues sometimes. But we know that stuff is designed to please the people who are sitting in the pews, not directed. Well, they may think they're directing it toward God, but God is rejecting it because it is in first designed to please them. And when God says, thou shalt have nothing before me, that even means your worship. Because watch this. Anything that we worship in front of God or before God or with more in interest, for ourselves, that's called idolatry. And so the worship of God, it has to be God-centered. It has to be God-pleasing. I was writing about the other day, and I was looking at all of the different services this particular church was having, and each church service had a different name of the style of worship that they were having. You know, of course, they had traditional, they had contemporary, they had, I can't remember the third one. They actually had 4 different ones, styles, because they had 5 different services, and they had 4 different names of styles of worship. And I just rode, I think, for the next 30 minutes thinking, I wonder what style is next. Because styles of worship are designed to target particular people who come to worship. Think about that. That's inappropriate and wrong. And so I'm just thinking, since we're getting so laxed and loosed in laws and morality, in my sanctified imagination, I can only imagine a couple of years from now, there are going to be styles of worship services, and I'll let you fill in the blank, that are going to be so immoral. Because the truth of the matter is, it's immoral to have any style of worship to please any type of people other than offer it to whom? To God. So I'm afraid of what's going to be the coming styles of worship in the days and years to come. So the point in Psalms 46 and 8 is, when we reflect upon what God has done in the past, it should cause us to worship. And what type of worship? What does our worship look like when we remind ourselves what God has done? Remember, what does our worship toward God looks like when we remind ourselves of what God has done? What does it sound like? It doesn't sound like it would be us speaking of our self-worth or esteem or anything. It sounds like it would all be what? Pointed and directed to God. And when we worship like that, it will give us strength and confidence, knowing that God is able and willing to continue work into the future with us. Let's look at our commentary, because I've got much for this one verse. It says, God never sits idly in heaven. Just think about that for a moment. God never sits idly in heaven. God is not a mere passive spectator of world events. God is not distantly removed. God is never off duty. God is never abdicating his throne. Watch this now. He does not abandon the world to run its own course. Instead, God remains where? On the throne, ever alert, ever active, continually what? Intervening in human history. Y'all, God is not sitting idly by, unaware, not involved, not directing human history. So when we look at what's happening in human history, the good, the bad, the ugly, the confused, the not understand, the misunderstood, you have to understand God is not a passive spectator. He's not sitting on his throne watching how this thing is going to end. God is directing things through his sovereignty and his power. Man, as believers, if we would just kind of hold on to that, if we would just kind of think that thing through, then when we get to seeing what's happening in the world, we should be encouraged, because we know, even though it looks like trouble, it looks chaotic, it looks, like, it's out of control. You got to understand that that's the sovereignty of God, because even though it looked chaotic and out of control, God is still controlling it. Nothing is happening that God is not controlling. That's what sovereignty is. So I know when we look at our personal situations, outside of our corporate situations, as believers, we got to remember God is not a spectator. He's there, running it, watching it, and intervening how and like he chooses. Continuing with the commentary, this is the truth of the psalmist that he affirms in Psalms 46 when he writes, "Come behold the works of the Lord, who has wrought desolation in the earth." Verse 8, by this open invitation, he calls people of God to contemplate, to consider, to think about the mighty works that God has performed on their behalf already. The historical background, which I tell you each week about this psalm, was a perilous time in the past when Jerusalem was surrounded by an invading foreign army. The situation looked, watch this now, hopeless for the people of God. Defeat looked to be inevitable. Death appeared inescapable. The grave was looming. It seemed like there was no way out of escaping this bleak outcome because the enemy was surrounding the city of Jerusalem. It looked hopeless. Anybody here ever was in a situation, that looked hopeless? Defeat looked inevitable. You were going to lose it or end up being separated from it. It ever seemed as if there was no way out? Well, this Psalms and this particular verse, we should be able to read it and be encouraged by it. Because in the midst of the ordeal of the people in Jerusalem who were surrounded by the enemy, the people called upon the Lord and they declared what? Their trust in him. What do we do in trying times? Who do we call on? What do we declare? What are our hopes and expectations of God working in our life and through the situation? No matter how hopeless it looks, no matter how defeating it appears, no matter how bleak the outcome, God, if he gets involved, ladies and gentlemen, wow. Ooh. Turn over. In response, God, as it were, he stepped out of heaven in the midst of their threatening crisis. When he appeared, he devastated their enemies. He gave them the victory they otherwise would have never known. In other words, God did for them what they couldn't do for themselves. The psalmist now calls upon the people of God in this 8 to behold what he has done for them. They must not lose sight of his mighty acts that delivered them from devastation. They must keep these awesome deeds in the forefront of their mind. How many of you have ever, was talking to your children? I would use children or grandchildren, and they appear to be functioning as if, they forgot your goodness, and then you recall your goodness toward them, to remind them of what you have done for them and towards them, with the hopes that that they will remember what has been done, and as they remember what has been done, that would affect what they were now doing. That's what you do. I call it getting not hysterical, but historical. You recall history on them in order to, change their attitude at the present moment. Well, y'all, that's the same thing God is saying. God is saying, remember what I have done for you in the past, and that should effectuate or change what you're doing right now or how you're thinking, in the present. You got to keep these deeds at the forefront of our minds. We got to remember who God is. We got to remember what God has done. We got to remind ourselves of his power. We got to inundate ourselves with the fact that he's present not only around us, but for those of us who are believers, within us. And as such, that's what we must be reflecting when we are in trying times or, being challenged. Let's read on. The same is true for us believers today. We must look back and behold the powerful works that God has performed on our behalf. Think about prayers that he had answered. Think about needs that he has supplied. Think about situations he has controlled, doors he has opened, circumstances he has overruled. Let us remember what God has done for us in the past to bring us into this present situation. God is not a one prayer answering God. God is not, just get you through one situation, remove you from one situation. He will overrule in many circumstances and situations. I've watched God take control of situations that I had no idea the outcome of it. And what the psalmist says is we got to remember that so we'll behave rightly now. So let's look at the words as we break this verse down. Verse 8 says, come, behold. First, the psalmist calls upon the people of God. He says, come, behold the works of the Lord. This verb come is actually the Hebrew word for walk. It literally means walk. That's what it means, walk. What the psalmist is saying, walk over here and see this. Lord have mercy. Take a very close look. Look carefully. Otherwise, you're going to miss this. You understand what he's saying? And so many times, y'all, we miss stuff. Why? Because the wrong thing is on the front of our mind. We're thinking about what's threatening us. We're thinking about what's looming in front of us. We're thinking about we're thinking about the obstacle instead of the omnipotent God. And that's what he's saying. He said, come over here and let me remind you, look at this. Oh, wow. I just see so many parental memories here. Walk over here and see this. Take a very close, careful look. Otherwise, you're going to miss this. That's what he's saying. The word behold means to observe something that is very important, something upon which you need to fix your gaze. God's people must narrow their focus upon what he has done for them. They must not let this intervention escape their minds. This is what we must do today as believers. In the midst of our hectic schedules, we need to pause and consider what God has done in our lives, in the past. We need to carefully review and recall what the invisible hand of God has performed on our behalf in the past. Sometimes we're no earthly good for the present because our needs are knocking and we're so concerned about what? The past. He's telling us the present. He's telling us to remember what he's done in the past. And that same God is able to deliver us from this situation. But you gotta think about it. You gotta bring it back to mind. You gotta think about it. You gotta focus on it. You gotta gaze on it. You gotta consider it, contemplate it, ruminate over it. That's what he's telling us. What does he want you to do? Come and look. In other words, walk over here, observe something important. And what does he want us to observe? Is right there, the works of the Lord. Specifically, these ancient believers were invited to carefully observe the works of the Lord. The psalmist identifies these works. Notice he says works in the plural, emphasizing the many deeds that God had done on behalf. Y'all, if we were to examine or take inventory of what God has done in our life, God hasn't done a thing in our life. You know what I'm saying? God has done what? Many things in our lives. God has done many, many things in our life. But we get so caught up on the present one thing that we don't have the fortitude or we're not considering the many things that he's done in the past. Thus, we get lost and feel hopeless, like, God is not listening, God won't intervene. And God is saying, no, I want you to walk over here. The psalmist is saying, walk over here. I want you to see something very important and consider what the invisible hand of God has already performed on your behalf. Works. So, it says, emphasizing the many. In this context, the word works are his mighty saving acts that rescued them from the imminent danger of the foreign oppressor. So in other words, this wasn't the first time that God had delivered them from many things. This wasn't the first time, and not just necessarily foreign enemies, but all types of troubles, whatever. This is not the first time. And you got to remember, this is the nation of Israel. This is the tribe of Judah. This is the Israelites. These are the children of those people who were in bondage for 400 years. And I'm sure grandmom and daddy and papa told them stories about what happened. And that's what he's saying here. Hey, remember what he delivered you from. If nothing else, remember the story that grandma, Grandpa Isaac told you about the Red Sea. Remember the story that he told you about when we were over in that land and there was no water and God provided water to come out of the rock. Remember the story about when you walked around the city of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down because you just spoke. He's saying, remember these things. The many works, the many saving acts that God had rescued them from foreign oppressors. The reference is what the Lord did to dramatically intervene and deliver them from devastating destruction and certain death. And they had many stories of what God had done for them. Many, many stories of what God had done for them. Beyond just, again, the Red Sea, they had many stories of how they were delivered. Even the very fact that Joseph goes to prison for 13, 14 years or something like that, and then he comes and he provides them food, and the 70 people come over there, and the nation, it's just so many, many things that he had done for them. That's what he's telling us. And as believers, y'all, that's what we've got to do. We've got to help people remember what God has done for us. Psalm 66:5, it says almost the same thing. It's a invitation where it says, come and see the works of God, who is awesome in his deeds towards who? The sons of men. These saints of old were called to investigate these divinely wrought works, which were great in number and great in power. They must never lose sight of what God has done for them. Listen, if you are 30 years old, God done enough for you already. Trust me. The truth of the matter, if you're 20, if you're in your teens, he's done enough for us already to come over here, focus, fixate on it, recall what he has done. He's done enough for us. And those are the things that we should use to encourage us in our times of trouble. And that's what he was saying here. He says, I need you to come over here and don't lose sight what God has done for you. If you're experiencing some type of sickness now, I guarantee you it's not the first sickness you've ever had. Come and see and remember what God has delivered you from. If it's a financial situation, maybe this is the first time due to the economy that you've been this broke, but you've got to remember God has delivered you from something already. And don't lose sight of that. This is how you have that type of hope, of strength in trying times. As believers, we must do the very same. We are too often preoccupied with what is taking place immediately in front of us. This causes us to lose sight of what God has done in the past to bring us to this point. We just worried about what we see, and we forget about what God has what? Done. We need to look back and consider the prayers God has already answered to bring us to the present. We need to reflect upon how God has orchestrated our previous circumstances to preserve us from where we are now. You know why a child will spend all of their money when they go in the store? Because they know they're going to be replenished. They know you're going to give them some more money at another date. They know the bank ain't closed. You understand what I'm trying to say to you? They know the bank's not closed. A child, you give them some money, they'll go in the store and they'll spend it all. You literally have to tell them, don't spend all your money in one place. Well, y'all, they ain't worried about it, because guess what? They depending on you to what? Give them what they need. When they depending on you to do in the future what you have what? Done for them in the past. That's what. They got faith in mommy and daddy, and especially grandparents. They got faith in us. They're like, man, I ain't worried about nothing. They got me. And in essence, that's what, this verse is saying. Remember how they have taken care of you in the past, how God have taken care of you in your past, and God is capable and able to do that in the very present trouble that you're in. That's what he's saying. Reflect on how God orchestrated our previous circumstances to preserve us for where we are now. The next phrase says, who has wrought desolations. I really like this part about it. This is the second half of the verse. It talks about God who has wrought desolations. In this context, the word works that God performed, they are actually clarified in verse 9 when it says, he makes wars to cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and cuts the spears in two. He burns the chariots with fire. We'll talk about that later, next week, Lord willing. But what is being said here about he has wrought desolation is talking about the works he performed in the past, and it's clarified that he makes wars to cease. Somebody ought to shout right there, because the same God who can make wars cease back then, if he chooses to, he can make wars cease even right now. Don't matter who in the White House, don't matter what Taliban is in whatever country, any place, if God wants it to cease to stop, God can make it stop. So, and if we don't believe God is like that, then we don't believe he's omnipotent, we don't believe he's sovereign, we don't believe he's in control, we don't believe he's all-powerful. God can make it stop anytime he wants. So if he's allowing it to happen, then it's got to be part of his what? Plan and purpose. And see, we keep trying to put logic behind what's happened over in Afghanistan. We keep trying to put reason behind. Listen, you want to free yourself up from arguments and all that stuff? Just know that God is in control. And I'm done with it. I'm done with it. I could argue you about stuff that why we were over there, and you can argue why we as America shouldn't have been over there, but I don't do that. I know one thing, God is sovereign, and even though it was a 20-year war, and the end looked reckless or whatever, I need you to understand something. God is not sitting in heaven, and that surprised him. God is not sitting in heaven going like, dang it, if they'd have got another president in there, he wouldn't have done that. Yeah, you think that's what God is doing? You think God is going like, Biden, oh, man, why you do that? Now I got to come up with another plan. Is that really how you think God is thinking? Y'all, God is sovereign. God is in control. And all of this stuff is working out to his eternal plan. And if you don't believe that he's like that, then whatever little bit of trouble you get in, your knees going to always knock. You're going to always pass out. You're going to always cheat, lie, and steal. You're going to always rob from God because you're going to really think that God can't provide. If you don't see God as provider and protector, if you don't see him like that, for us, especially who are believers, God doesn't react to trouble. God already knows about the trouble. And as Christians, sometimes we get caught up in conversations we need to just kind of back off on because we actually feed into the frenzy of folk who are not believers. What are you going to do with all those people who died? What are you going to do with all that money who spent? What are you going to do with all of those parents who died? What are you going to do with all of that? Again, God is in control. Nobody dies before their death date. See, here's the thing. We all think we should be living. I'm going to take a few seconds to catch up with you. We all think we deserve tomorrow. because we pay our taxes and we don't cheat and we go to work and we be on time. We all think we deserve tomorrow. We all think we deserve to be 25 years old, 60 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, no. Sinners deserve death. Anything beyond, still living and we're sinners, y'all, that is the grace, mercy, and compassion of God. So we keep counting numbers and looking at all the stuff that's happening in the world and Biden killed people. Or Trump killed people for that matter. Or George Bush killed people. We keep putting it. Y'all, God is not sitting in heaven as I open this lesson tonight, idly by, looking at what's happening, going, can you imagine God going, oh my God. Who? Y'all missed that. God can't go like, oh my God. Y'all not here. God, you understand what I'm saying, brother? God can't go like, oh, wow, man. I can't believe that. God will never say, I can't believe that. God will never go like, what I'm going to do next. That's not God. That's not this God. That's not our God. And y'all, if we can remember that, man, we'd be better believers if we would hold to that. He has wrought desolation. So let me read. He makes wars to cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and cuts the spear. That's verse 9. He burns the chariots with fire. This states how God went to war for them and fought their battles. You get that? He was, there it is, their protector and defender. Y'all know what the verse says? The battle belongs to what? To the Lord. He say, stand still. The battle belongs. Oh, y'all not hearing me? Y'all not hearing me? And I ain't just talking about, nation battles or wars, but the battle between you and whatever you're dealing with on earth, y'all. God, that battle belongs to God. It ain't just talking about a physical or financial. Your health battle belongs to the Lord. Whatever we battling, it belongs to the Lord. I know that's easier said than done, but ladies and gentlemen, it's not just talking about the physical fight that we have with people. Whatever battle that we're having, God, you got to, okay, maybe it's not making sense. Maybe I'm just too hyper about this. As a believer, God lives in us. So whatever threatens us, threatens God who is in us. And so the fight is not just toward us. To fight us or me, you got to fight him who lives within me. I don't care if you are army or if you are a cancer. Do you understand what I'm saying? I don't care if you're a sickness. I don't care if you're a financial situation. That battle belongs to the Lord. We keep trying to fight the fight. When the truth of the matter is, as a believer, God's not going to sit there and be ducking, He's God. So we've got to remember, he's the protector and defender, and the battle belongs to him. So notice what it says, who has wrought desolation. Then the word desolation, it literally means waste. We would say in our vernacular that God laid something to waste. It means to completely devastate an object. It means reducing it to nothing, rather. These desolations were when God went to war on behalf of his people. And notice what he did. He utterly destroyed their foreign invaders. These desolations were the fields covered with the dead bodies of their enemies. Going back to a couple visible things we know. Red Sea, Pharaoh's army, tracking across the Red Sea. God desolated them. He utterly destroyed them. You know what I'm saying? Going back to Jericho, everybody who was in the city, when the walls came tumbling down, utterly wiped them out. And that's why when God would tell people, when you go over there and do the enemy, kill every last one of them. The babies and children too, every last one of them. Y'all not hearing what I'm saying. The enemy, he utterly, completely, he lays them to waste. That's the kind of God that we fight. That we have fighting for us. Lord have mercy. That should give us comfort, peace, and strength that God is capable of laying to waste utterly, completely, whatever it is that's threatening us as his children. And that's what the psalmist said. Come real close. I want to remind you something. Look at this. Let me show you what God did in the past. And this ought to remind you of his potential to handle it for you what? In the future. But we keep getting in God's way or getting in our own way, trying to fight our own fight, because I ain't going to let nobody talk to me like that. You know, y'all know we spiritually pop our necks. Y'all know we do that. You know, our pride come in as men, and you know, we would rather go down with the ship than to jump on a lifeboat. That's how we do, because pride, we think that we are so in control. And that's the beauty of what God does. God makes it where it looks like you're in control, but he's really in control. He gives us so much latitude and so much grace and so much mercy, and we get to run so far. But when God has designated how far we're going to run from him, he stops it. Especially for those of us who are his. Man, this is where I find my greatest strength. This is where I find my greatest joy. This is how I'm able to endure stuff that look like you shouldn't be enduring. Because the battle is God's. I was thinking about it just the other day. I recently had circumstance come in ministry, and I was just thinking about it the other day, and I was thinking how almost 25 years now we've served this body, and you know, been there for births, for weddings, for funerals, for showers, for, you know, all kind of stuff. For, you know, some member, mother, cousin, somebody passed and they wasn't members of the church, but we try to be there to serve these people and all of that. And then those very same people will hold 10, 15, 20-year grudges and speak against, you know, me. And all I've been trying to do is serve them for all those times. And you know the only thing that keeps me going, the only thing that keeps me going is knowing that the battle is not mine. It's the Lord's. Your thoughts against me, your, you know, acts or whatever against me, y'all, you're not. And here's the thing. You still got to get through God to do anything to me. You might seek to sabotage, destroy, or whatever, but you still got to go through God to do it. And y'all, each of us ought to be reminded that that's the kind of God that we serve. So even though there's people who do us wrong, speak wrong to us, who all we try to do is love and serve, you got to remember, the battle's the Lord's. It's not ours. We don't have to fight that battle for them to respect us or to, you know, to appreciate us. That battle is theirs that they will have with the Lord. Yeah. So he says desolations. The fields were covered with the dead bodies of their enemies. So the message is clear right here. Those who come against the people of God come against God himself. God identifies with his people. When his people are threatened, God steps in to protect them. No one can stand against God when he, the Lord of hosts, goes to war. I was thinking about this because it happened a couple times in my life, and I said it'll never happen again. You ever tried to step in to help somebody? First of all, they were having problems with somebody else. I don't want to talk specifically and like that because I don't think I'm talking about their business. But, they were having problems with somebody else. Maybe somebody else was threatening them or something like that. And you try to get in or step in or maybe even lend a voice of reason to kind of, help people out. And then the two who was going at it turn around and they get to going at you. That ever happened to you before? Like, wait a minute. I thought I was here helping you through this particular thing. Let me tell you what I see with that. What I see right here. It says this message is clear. Those who come against the people of God come against God himself. God identifies with his people. What am I saying, ladies and gentlemen? I'm simply saying when people are threatened, God steps in to protect them. And when he steps in to protect them, no one can stand against him because he is Lord. When God goes to war, when God fights for you, it don't matter who fighting against you. When God is fighting for you. God lays to waste armies. I like the way the last fight in the Bible is described. After the church has been raptured in early Revelations, and then you have the tribulation days, and then we who in heaven come back with Christ, for him to marry his bride on the earth, and all of the people who went through the tribulation time, those who are saved. I like the way the fight happens. Because if you look at it in the book of Revelation, God don't even throw a blow. In essence, it's almost like, how somebody like jump at you like that. they really don't hit you, they jump at you and then you pass out. Literally, that's how it's going to happen in the end time. When Christ throws the death blow, if you will, to Satan and everybody, God ain't going to have to knock him out. All God got to do is flinch at him and he's laid to waste. That's the God who we serve. When it says God doing battle, God don't take a lick and give a punch. It ain't no Mike Tyson fight. Nobody, what is that saying? Your arm's too short to box with God. Nobody getting no lick in on God. You understand what I'm saying? Nobody punches God. And God don't have to throw punches. God can just speak and lay to waste a whole army. That's what it says. Those who come against the people of God come against God himself because God identifies with his people. When his people are threatened, he steps in to protect them. No one can stand against the Lord of hosts. You remember last week when I told you what the Lord of hosts means? That means the Lord of, armies, and the armies are the myriads and myriads of what? Heavenly host angels. He's the commander-in-chief of the myriads and myriads, the many, 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 many angels in heaven with him. He's that. And God said he don't even have to fight. His angels don't even have to fight. They just stand and watch the fight. No one can stand against him when God goes to war. So you make sure that you ain't going to war trying to fight a battle. Make sure the battle is the Lord's. And I assure you, the outcome is going to be just like God wants it. Now, however, as many misuse this verse is not a guarantee that we will always be delivered out of every difficulty. Stephen and James, for example, was the first two martyrs in the book of Acts, and they were not delivered from death. Jesus himself was delivered over to death according to God's what? Sovereign plan. But we will be rescued ultimately when he brings us safely into his presence in heaven. So you need to understand, it don't mean that good people don't die. But let me tell you something. Good people who die ain't got nothing to lose. When I say good people, I mean people who are in Christ. There's nothing to lose. Paul says what? He said, man, it ain't nothing but gain if I die. You know, and that's what we've got to see. To be in the presence of God, yes, I love my loved ones, but to be in the presence of God is nothing but gain. You don't lose when a believer dies. A believer don't lose when he dies or she dies. So this verse doesn't guarantee that nobody won't ever die. Death oftentimes is God's sovereign plan. I mean, all the time is God's sovereign plan. Nobody dies off a watch on God. The 3 million plus people in COVID around the globe, not one of those persons died without God's knowledge. Not one. And see, we keep pointing stuff, and we don't ever go back to the root cause or to the basis, position. God is in control. Yeah, you wish that loved ones wouldn't have died. Yes, you wish all of this. But y'all, again, we keep acting like we are promised to live, and we're not. What we're promised is to die. And that's why we need to get right before then, because our death, for those of us who die in Christ, y'all, it's actually a promotion. And if you don't believe like that, then let me tell you what you're going to do. You're going to go through life trying to fight your own battles. Yeah, you're trying to conquer your own enemies. So it says, who has wrought desolations, and look where he did it in earth. Last page, last point. This verse concludes with the psalmist declaring that these divine works have been performed where? In the earth. In other words, whatever God planned and purposed in heaven has been where? Executed upon the earth. Again, y'all, recent thing in Afghanistan, whatever it is, it's been executed. God's plans in heaven are executed where? On earth. Whatever God planned and purpose in heaven has been executed upon the earth. The sovereign will of God cannot be thwarted by mere men. What has been predetermined in heaven will not remain in heaven. Instead, it will come to pass upon the earth. And ladies and gentlemen, everything that happened has been predetermined by God. From the creation of Adam and Eve, from Noah and the ark and the flood, for all of those things. These were predetermined. None of these things were surprises to God. No sickness, no bubonic plague, no pandemic. Nothing is a surprise to God. Truth of the matter is, I've taught you guys through the book of Revelations a couple years ago, this thing is just unfolding and unfolding and unfolding to exactly like God intends it for it to happen, so the book of Revelation will be in play. And everything is leading directly to that. From what's happening in China, from what's happening in Russia, from what's happening in other nations, what's happening in Jerusalem, what's happening in Babylon, Afghanistan, all in America. See, y'all, for the longest, we were this proud nation. We were this nobody can touch us nation. But I tell y'all, and I've been telling y'all for the wrath of abandonment. When a people abandon God, God's abandoned those people. I tell you, one of the best books I've ever read in regards to, and I don't deal with politics because it's not a book on politics, but what set me right about politics, a book written by John MacArthur years ago, and it says, the question is not, can God bless America? The question is, will God bless America? Ain't no question about can, God bless America. That ain't no question. The question is, will he? And why should he? Especially if America keeps getting more immoral and more immoral and more immoral. and living, disintegration of the family, all of these things. And we've got the freedom, y'all. We're the leading nation. We're not fighting stuff that people over there in Russia or Africa or other continents are fighting. We're not fighting those things. We have biblical freedoms here in America. We could stand for those of us who are his, but boy, the church has gotten weaker and weaker and more compromised and compromised, turning its back on God. And when people turn their back on God, God turns his back on them and leave us to ourselves. And look at the mess we're in now, because it's obvious. It's obvious. Anybody can read or listen at the news. It's obvious. Because, y'all, it's stuff we can't control. It's stuff we can't control. Jennifer and I was looking at the news earlier today. We've been right there in Lake Tahoe. Matter of fact, I was in Lake Tahoe when I got the message that God was taking my mama home. I'll never forget that. Me and Jennifer was in Lake Tahoe. I just prayed to God, God, please, just let me get back to her. And he granted that. I got back to her, spoke to her in the hospital bed, and told her I loved her, thank her for waiting on me. And a couple hours later, Mama went on to be with God. But that whole week I was in Tahoe, I just was unsettled. I couldn't enjoy it. But it's this beautiful place, beautiful place. I was telling you, we were right there. And now to look at Lake Tahoe today, on fire, a fire that say 16% contained. This beautiful, pristine place, fires here, floods here, hurricanes here, tornadoes here, all this stuff happening right here in North America, just destroying. Y'all, all of this stuff is leading to a climactic end. Because you got to understand, in the book of Revelation, America ain't there no more. Just for the record. There's a period in the book of Revelation where America is not there anymore. It's destroyed. It doesn't exist. God has brought all his people back to Jerusalem so he can fulfill what he wants to do over in Jerusalem. Babylon. Y'all, that's the Bible. And so when I hear believers talk about stuff like we came here to stay, like we built America and it's going to be here for y'all, all of this stuff is unfolding just like the Bible said is unfolding. So our thing would be to make sure that God is our God, because he would protect us. And even if the protecting is taking us to be with him, he will protect us. He will defend us. So again, whatever God planned and purposed in heaven is being executed upon the earth. Everything that God wants to come to pass will come to pass. That second paragraph. The apostle confirms this truth when he writes in Ephesians 1 and 11 that God is working. Did you give me that verse? Yeah. Also, we obtain an inheritance having been predestined, watch now, according to his purpose, who works all things after the what? Counsel of his will. So what Paul is confirming here is that God is working all things after the counsel of his will. This is to say that God has, watch this now, predestined. He has foreordained. He has foreordained how this thing ends. He's causing every detail, according to Romans 8:28, to work together for the believer's good. See, we keep thinking God calls all things to work together for the good. I mean, if I lose a boyfriend, I'm going to give me a new boyfriend. Y'all, come on. When it says God's working all things together for the good, you got to read verse 29 and 30 in Romans 8, because it gets to talking about for those whom he predestined, he justified, he predestined, he justified, he glorified. God has said, all the things that happen in the earth, don't worry about it. Those things will ultimately work together for you. What I have predetermined in heaven will work together for your good. That's what he's talking about. God has been constantly at work in our lives, y'all. And he will continue to become. This is what should give us strength as relates to trying times. So I'll close with these three questions. How will you respond to what the psalmist calls you to do? Will you behold the mighty acts that God has performed in your past? Remember what he's done. That should give you strength for the future, present. And will you take note of what he's already done for you? Sickness, health, finances, whatever, all those things that teach us to be faithful toward God no matter what it looks like we're going through. So, if you'll have this kind of strength, which is his strength, you will be able to deal with whatever trying times you experience. Amen? Amen. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.